Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Davis,
And I'm Claire Katzenson,
and
and
we're so excited.
we're so thrilled for you all to be here for this final video in this series about interrupting oppression through the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. Thank you all so much for being here. If you've made it to all five, huge shout out to you all. Um, should we do our backgrounds here?
Maybe one last time. Why not?
Line for the kicks and giggles of it all. My background is in critical race and ethnic studies and sustainability and education. So that really lends itself to, oh my gosh, what is the world like now? And what do we want it to be like? And how can we create actionable steps to reach that? Very empowering, very beautiful, very hopeful. And I now have the privilege of working within the social services field. And it is absolutely atrocious out here, but we try every single day. On that note, Hannah.
I lived, breathed, walked, ate, did all the things psychology for many years, and I have a bachelor's and master's in psychology. I have about 7 years of experience now in social services, and including some time at child welfare, time at CASA, and various other places. And I'm just, really passionate about social services and helping to reach people where they're at and give them the best, most equitable services that we can to meet their needs and help them grow. So we're excited to be here to kind of talk to you about, how you can use diversity, equity, and inclusion lens in your interaction with families. And this is our last session. So congratulations, like Claire said. Today we're going to focus on interrupting oppression. Should we push? Oh, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. First, we're going to take you through a journey, which you should already know, to look at the documents we will be using, including your definition sheet. That includes the definitions, the references, and the resources. Remember to keep this handy so that if you are forgetting anything that we've talked about in the past, you're able to come check out the definitions. And you're also able to look at the new definitions that are on here for session number 5. And by new, I mean you've had access to them this whole time, but Claire and I are finally talking about them for the first time. And the other thing you need to keep handy is this DEI Session 5 Interrupting Oppression activity sheet. This activity packet is going to have all sorts of things in it this time, and we are going to walk you through how to utilize this packet as we move through, but just take quick note that the reflective writing prompts are going to be kind of put together again, and then you're going to have this whiteboard activity that we're going to explain in a little bit of detail. You're going to go through ways to interrupt bias, including calling in and calling out. And so all of this is kind of separated by the type of activity versus like where we would have at the end, the last page would be your last writing response. Your last writing response is actually going to be on the first page because that's just how it works when you have so many amazing activities. So we are going to bring you back, and without further ado, jump right into our land acknowledgements as soon as I find the present button behind Claire and myself. Ooh, wow, it liked to go really far away. We are not that far yet.
Okay, so as per usual, please do not skip over this part, even though it is going to be the exact same little spiel. Land acknowledgements, in case this is the first one that you're seeing, which if you're starting with the last one, what a rebel you are. This is a practice in order to pay respects to the land that we are currently on and the people who have stewarded this land. That is incredibly important to do. Indigenous tribes are still around, and this is kind of a little tutorial of if you are not in Medford, which is where Hannah and I are. Well, technically, Hannah, you're in Central Point, but it's actually the same land acknowledgements for that area. If you're not in this specific area, you're going to go to this blue link that says site, and you're going to find the specific tribes geographically based off of where you are right now while you're viewing this. Then you're going to go and you're going to look up those specific tribes and you're going to look for their land acknowledgements and you're going to read them out. So if you're not in Medford, not that you don't have to listen to us, but you're kind of going to be doing your own activity. Feel free to pause here and do all that jazz. Some things to be aware of is that multiple different tribes could have been stewarding the land that we are currently occupying. So that is why we're kind of having plural, not just like tribe, you know, folks moved around based on like weather, migration, what they were trying to do, all of that certain jazz. We also really encourage you to look up the history of the specific tribes, which land you are on, and donating if you can, having meaningful engagement. Please look into the land back movement. It is a very, very important one. And not just taking this as like a historical thing. There are so many tribes that are active right now and they are working and fighting for so many different causes. So tap in. It's a really important thing to be doing. That being said, I am going to be reading the one that we have here, the two different tribes. So that is the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians and the Coquille Indian Tribe. So we are just going to go straight in, and I am going to try and make this a little bit bigger because the font is itty bitty right now. Okay, so for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, their land acknowledgement states, we want to respectfully acknowledge the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. We want to further acknowledge the tribe's deep cultural and spiritual connection to these lands in addition to its entire interest in ancestral areas, which include over 6 million acres located within the Rogue and Umpqua River watersheds. These lands and the vibrant resources within them have been important since time immemorial and will continue to be a vibrant part of tribes' cultural identity for generations to come. We recognize the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of the tribe and thank them for continuing to share their Indigenous knowledge and perspective on how I/we might work together to manage and care for these shared resources sustainably with mutually beneficial outcomes. We commit to engaging in a respectful, meaningful, and successful partnerships as I/we explore shared stewardship of these lands. Okay, next one, it is going to talk about other tribes, not just specifically the Coquille Indian tribe. That is because this is one that they, created with a bunch of other tribes, and they were just like, "Hey, this is our bit. We are recognizing all of them in our recognition of the land." So without further ado, let me slide that and then get this, and we are good to go. Okay. So, Indigenous tribes and bands have been with the lands that we inhabit today throughout Oregon and the Northwest since time immemorial and continue to be a vibrant part of Oregon today. We would like to express our respect to the First Peoples of this land, the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon, Burns Paiute Tribe, Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation, Coquille Indian Tribe, Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. It is important that we recognize and honor the ongoing legal and spiritual relationships between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call Oregon. The interconnectedness of the people, the land, and the natural environment cannot be overstated. The health of one is necessary for the health of all. We recognize the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and thank them for continuing to share their traditional ecological knowledge and perspective on how we might care for one another in the land so it can take care of us. We commit to engaging in a respectful and successful partnership as stewards of these lands. Thank you so much for staying engaged through that. And Hannah, if you could take us to the next slide while I shuffle all of mine around. Okay, diving in deep with our comfort zone. apologies if this, well, not apologies. Thank you for listening to this again. If this is the fifth time you're hearing it, comfort zone, so comfy, so thrilling to be in. However, just existing in our comfort zone does not usually like grow our understanding of the world and society and ourselves and like leave space for expansiveness unless your comfort zone is expansiveness. So, this visual aid on the right here is really meant to demonstrate just kind of like a simplified version of this concept about comfort, fear, learning, and growth zones. We're mainly trying to illustrate that we are trying to push through uncomfortability of, when our beliefs are being challenged, when maybe we don't understand what's going on or what's being said exactly, and really being able to interrogate that and understand and question it instead of immediately brushing it aside and feeling and just sitting in that discomfort. Discomfort isn't there isn't much use besides making yourself uncomfortable for that. So, a way to turn to is being like coming from a learning mindset with the idea that you would like to grow. This is not being forced. However, you want to engage is however you're going to engage in this training. But being in a learning zone and being a sponge is a really fun time. That being said, here are some things to kind of ponder, being what zone are you in right now? Which one do you want to be during in this time? Do you kind of want to step outside of that? Are you already feeling, oh my gosh, like interrupting? I'm not great at interrupting. How do we have healthy conversations and potentially conflict for betterment? That could be coming up. Which zone are you often in your normal life? Like, do you intentionally go out and learn new and challenging things or have difficult conversations with people so that you're able to like understand different perspectives? Or are you someone who, you kind of surround yourself with just the people who all agree with you and it can sometimes be an echo chamber? And then what's so comfy about our comfort zones? What can we pull from that space to aid and comfort for all of these other ones and make learning and growing like a beautiful process instead of one that's coming from like fear or shame or judgment or denial? And then taking a moment to reflect on like, we've done hard things in the past. When was the last time you powered through being uncomfortable? What came up for you? And then what did it lead to in your life? Or if maybe that was a really not great time and situation, maybe take a minute to pause and be like, let me think about that right now. But if you're not pausing this, we're going to go to the next slide and we're going to shuffle along with this presentation.
Okay, so this will be the first time you need to change or turn to your activity packet, and you're going to do your reflective thinking writing exercise. I'm not sure why it showed up so fun on the screen, but it sure did. So your question is, has your reflection and learning during these trainings led to any changes in how you approach oppression, barriers, experiences, etc.? So you're kind of reflecting on all of the trainings. I think it's worth note that, the reason we repeat things in every session at the very beginning is because we did offer this once in person and, well, a few times in person, and some people weren't able to attend every session. So there may be folks out there that were excited for this because they missed session 5. So they're not joining us for the other ones virtually. Or maybe they, went to 2 and they need to go to 3 more. So we're repeating some of the initial content to get you centered and focused into our learning space. And then also if you are only joining us for one virtual session. So if during this and during, the feedback portion, you are one of the people that's only popping in for today's session because you already did the other ones, then maybe take a moment to reflect over the DEI in person as well as the DEI virtually. So again, has your reflection and learning during these trainings led to any changes in how you approach oppression, barriers, experiences, and so on? We'll give you a moment to hit that pause button, and then we'll be back at the next slide.
Okay, we are back at the next slide. So, what is on the docket today? We are going to be doing a recap of all of the different trainings we've done so far, bite-sized pieces, not like verbatim by any means. And then we're going to be talking about what is interrupting specifically. We're also going to be addressing barriers that can come up within the process of trying to interrupt oppression and harm as it's occurring, different ways to be able to do that, and how specifically through the CASA role that's an like the specific avenues through that. I think that this is also like a good time to be able to address that CASAs have a very particular role where they are advocates first and foremost. And having an advocate for a child or their family by extension, or even like the current placement that they're in, is so huge for a unbiased person to come in and highlight what is not okay and what's not working. And you all are in positions to be able to show up to these meetings, court hearings, all these different places, visits, and state the case of like, this is not okay what's happening. And so that is why we're having an entire time to be like, here are some ways to actually interact with that tangibly instead of just bring it up at some convo, like enjoy that uncomfortability. And then we also love the added bonus of like, you could just use this in your life too. But that's our intention today.
Absolutely. And I know it does say group discussion activity, and that is how we had it when we were in person. And our intention here, our hope for you is that you do take this to kind of a space, a group to have further conversation on barriers and on the different things that we'll discuss during the whiteboard activity with other CASAs. You know, you have CASA chats, you have other opportunities where you all are getting together. You may or may not have a peer coach or CASA friends. And while you can't discuss the ins and outs of your specific CASA child and their family, you can absolutely have conversations about practice and things that you are and are not struggling with in your advocacy. So please feel free to have these conversations, to utilize these activities. Maybe you all want to meet up, you know, kind of like book club does and talk about this. Maybe you don't. But our intention is to hopefully you do go on to have these conversations with other CASAs.
Or other people in your life,
Yes,
any of
absolutely. Okay, so we're going to jump back into the unknown like every other session. And when you hear something that feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, or piques your interest, write it down. And at the end of the session, choose one thing you wrote about to explore further. Jump down that rabbit hole. And now that you're at the end of our you know, learning experience together, maybe choose a few things because you won't be just waiting for our next session. You know, we'll have done them all with you. So choose a few things to go explore further. Previously on DEI. So we're jumping into the part of the agenda where we do our quick recap, grit out your popcorn.
that. Okay, so recap. These are the definitions we have been utilizing for diversity, equity, inclusion, and oppression. Since we are talking about interrupting oppression today, that definition is the state of being subject to unjust treatment and or control. Take a moment to familiarize yourself with the other definitions because they are incredibly important and the entire foundation of this training. Any other things that you would add to that, Hannah?
No, that's beautiful. Exactly that. We've been referencing these throughout the training, so I think you all know what we're talking about at this point. But if you need any help, reference that sheet, go find some other resources, go back to session one. Yeah. Okay, so we are going to do a little recap on the brain. And what I really want to draw our attention back to was this concept that not belonging is painful. So again, there was a study where MRIs were revealed, or they revealed that when a human experiences pain, it is experienced in the same part of the brain as when you feel social isolation or a lack of belonging. And so in the study, it was a thumb prick that had given the reaction, you know, in this part of the brain. And then on the same part of the brain, it was a somebody reading a script where they were getting kicked out of the community and no longer allowed to be a part of it. They, you know, they were outcasted. And so, why this is important to us and to the conversations that we're having here is because we have a lot of CASA children and parents and other people we're interacting with that don't have a sense of belonging. They don't know where they belong in the world. You know, you may have a CASA child that has bounced from home to home to home. Maybe they have experienced multiple family placements and they've never felt like they fit with any of their family. Maybe all of their biological family is unknown or unsafe, or, you know, we have a few children that have lost both of their parents to substance use and their parents are no longer alive to be there. So there is a huge sense of not knowing where you belong in this world or who you belong with for our CASA families. And it's important to know that when a child is still in that state of not belonging, they are essentially still being traumatized. So even though we may have taken them out of this unsafe physical situation that they were experiencing with a parent, and not we, but social services, right? The field of social services, the caseworker has removed the child is now somewhere safe physically. If they don't feel a sense of belonging to the people that they're with or to any like given space, then they can still be feeling that physical pain essentially, but it's a different kind, right? It's that emotional pain, that heart pain, and it's still actively triggering that stress response system. And if we remember, when that stress response system is triggered, it's causing what's called atrophy. I'm going to move this so you can see all of the fun definitions. Where should we put you? Right here. Okay, that's where you're going. So it's causing what's called atrophy in the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for helping us make really thoughtful decisions. And it is also causing hypertrophy, the increase or enlargement of cell size into the amygdala. And the amygdala, again, is that quick reaction, hypervigilance, deciding if we are safe or not, and our quick response system. And so as that's getting bigger, we're becoming kind of more emotionally reactive. And as the prefrontal cortex is getting smaller, we're losing that ability to de-escalate our emotions and to regulate our bodies and to know that what is triggering us isn't making us unsafe. So if a child is still stuck in this state of kind of chronic stress and feeling like they don't belong, they're continuing to have that happen in their brain, theoretically, right? Or maybe not theoretically. The atrophy is happening and that hypertrophy is happening, and they are still essentially being hijacked by their amygdala, which is decreasing their ability to concentrate in school, to learn, to make good decisions, and to control their behaviors. When they're getting escalated, they're running out the door and running away. They're not calming themselves down and having a reasonable conversation with the adults around them. So it's really important to remember what is happening in the brain, and why our kids are maybe having the behaviors that they are having, especially when we're talking about interrupting something, because if given, you know, using the wrong words, if not having the right cadence in your voice when talking to somebody, you can really continue to escalate what is already a triggering situation for them. Okay, so now that we've talked a little about trauma in the brain, which I could have gone on for so much longer, but I reeled myself in, we are going into interrupting. So, what is it? What are we interrupting? So, we are going to talk about interruptions as a tool and skill to help course correct when someone is upholding oppressive ideologies within conversations or actions. So it can be both, not everything, you know, when we're talking about oppression is necessarily a conversation. It is also physical actions that people are doing. And we need to remember that, you know, there is and we'll talk about this a little bit more in barriers, but there is kind of like a social stigma, right, to the idea of interrupting people. But we're not talking about interrupting people in a normal conversation when nobody is causing harm. We're talking about interrupting people if they are causing harm or could cause harm because of the words they're saying. And that might even be letting them finish their sentence. And then you're interrupting the action that they did and saying, what you just said wasn't okay. So we're going to practice that, but it might feel uncomfortable to practice interrupting people, especially women, because women were taught specifically not to interrupt people. Especially I remember growing up as a little girl, you talk when you're spoken to, things like that were thrown around all the time with random adults that I saw in my life. Thankfully, not my own mom. But, a lot of people have said that. So it is an important thing to remember that women are often told not to interrupt people, or there is a expectation that they won't, more so than men. They're interrupted more often than men, and it can feel uncomfortable to interrupt, to stop, to course correct. All of those things are true, but we just need to kind of push through because our goal is to stop harm that's happening to families and to kids.
I would also add that calling back to our positioning ourselves in oppression training, that was the one right before this, is that we wanted that to be the foundation for, especially if you are a part of a privileged community or a privileged group where like you're, how do I word this? Like you are being able to experience that privilege or ease because of somebody else's in another community's subjugation. We're also really wanting to gear this training to being able to be like, it is within your right and responsibility to show up, in the same way. What is that one thing called, Hannah, where it's like, um, if you it's like when you're out and about, if someone is like going through something, you have to interact, like a good Samaritan law, like
Yeah.
that, you know what I mean? Like I like to think of this as like the good Samaritan law of like, if I am hearing somebody say something, and if it's a part of my community, I'll step up in the ways that feel safe and comfortable. If it's for another community that's being like oppressed casually or just as it is, um, putting yourself out there because you're the one who's least likely going to be receiving harm from that, because if you're in a more protected identity. So I hope that that made a little bit of sense, but I think that that was like, this was a good point to put it in as an addition.
Yes, that's beautiful. I love it. Okay, so we're going to jump into the whiteboard activity part one. And we're going to take this as the time to pull up your sheet so you can kind of see where we're going with this whiteboard activity. So if you go to your DEI activity packet, it will be, I believe, on the second page. Here it is, the second page. And we're going to be going through today to talk about the types of oppression that are that people experience, and then we'll look at the systems that those exist in, kind of the role of CASA, what CASA sees, and experiences CASA has had. We'll talk about that. And then we're going to look at barriers to interrupting. We're going to do the practice interruptions, and then you're going to do your takeaways. So that being said, this is the page you're looking at, and we're starting with oppression. I'm going to take us back here for a moment, and we'll be here for a while. And I wish I could start it where I want to, but that never works. So we are here. Okay, so what are we interrupting?
Never an
For the
option.
sake of this training, oops, we have given you the list of what we're interrupting because we've already talked about it in past trainings, and I will hand it over to Claire to talk about what we're interrupting.
Yes, so we are interrupting oppressive systems as they exist today. These different isms, as we like to call them, so like racism, sexism, homophobia, etc., are ways that uphold a white supremacist structure within our country. That being the United States, that's where we are operating from and training from and learning from and all that jazz. I would direct you to our training on systemic oppression if you would like to if you haven't already, would like to learn about what the heck we're talking about and being specific about white supremacy, because that phrase is a lot right now. Like we hear it a lot of the time. Um, what we're talking about specifically in regards to this training is the way that different forms of oppression uphold this structure, which is inherently unjust, harmful, exclusionary, not condoning belonging by any means. It's created for the opposite. And the thing that I really do like to emphasize with this is that these are all terms and ways of relegating society and groups of people in order for the folks who are of to protect certain people and their identities above everyone else, and for there to be, a hoarding of wealth and access and networking and health, and we could keep going on forever. I keep saying more things. That being said, that is what we are going to be targeting. So we are not trying to cut around the uncomfortability of this. We are just going straight to it and trying to unpack some shit. So, without further ado, Hannah, what systems does oppression exist in?
A
Take a
little
wild
playful
guess.
pun here.
Right? A
With
little.
systems. I couldn't help myself. So, this is where you're going to turn to your activity packet and you're going to write down some ideas. Just so you know, I will be giving you the answers that the class essentially that we taught in person came up with and what we all wrote together. I have kind of created that into a virtual format, but this is a time for you to go do your own brainstorming. You can write in there if you want. You can scribble it somewhere else and then fill it in with the in context that we provide. It's up to you. But take a second, go to the activity packet, jot down some ideas of what systems you think oppression exists in. We'll give you a moment to pause.
God, I love that picture. So pretty.
So isn't it beautiful?
So just like the colors. I'm just like, wow. Like,
Okay, we're going to assume that you've paused and come back to our random rambles. And we're going to show you what we came up with as a class. So, all the wonderful CASAs that were in our trainings, and the two different trainings that we did in person for this specific topic, came up with the following. It exists in media, in like the social world. So think, TikTok, Instagram, those types of systems. News, it exists in our schools, our legal systems, in the laws that are created, national, and statewide. National. It exists in the child welfare system, in the workplace, politics, in the medical field, transportation, in our family systems, in events and social gatherings, in hospitality, and really just in all systems and all aspects of life is where we see oppression.
and the thing,
Anything
oh,
to add?
sorry. Yes, I think there was a certain point in all of the trainings that we did for this where people were like, we were listing out all these things, and it was like, well, actually, it's everywhere. And every single time that happened, and there was like that click of like, these are just every single, like, we just see it in our lives all of the time. Um, I hope that this wasn't the spoiler alert, but in case it's not, it's everywhere.
Okay, so now we're going to look at what does oppression look like from the CASA perspective. So when you're thinking specifically as your role as a CASA, where have you seen homophobia, classism, transphobia, xenophobia, Claire, keep going, racism,
That phobia,
classism, fat phobia,
all of them.
all of them. Where have you seen these interactions, these happenings of oppression? The words are there. It's late at night. We know them. And what does that look like from the CASA perspective? And again, I'll give you a second to pause because I don't want to spoil it before you hit the pause button. The thoughtfulness.
Right,
And if
truly.
you see the perspective, we're giving you this to zoom in. Okay, I'll quit. I'll
Hannah
quit.
loves this slide.
I just can't with these sleds. They make me happy. Okay, so again, that's those same two classes. They came up with a lot of different things. So kids falling between the cracks, including, in educational settings, if they're neurodivergent and they're not getting the resources that they need in school, they're not getting IEPs that they need, or they have an IEP, but it's still not enough to actually meet their needs because the school can't, um, doesn't have the resources to meet them where they're at. And we could talk about all sorts of different school programs that really have been successful in meeting kids' needs, especially those that have experienced trauma, that have anxiety, depression, all sorts of other experiences. And so we know that it is a possibility. I have a puppy breaking into the room. So we know that it is a possibility, and we are also seeing it in, assuming backgrounds of people. There's a lot of things that are happening in the system where you just kind of make assumptions of where the family came from and what their experiences were instead of going, and asking questions. We talked about the power differentials that exist between parents and clients, or parents and caseworkers and attorneys, even between CASAs and attorneys. And let's see, resource parents struggling with gender identity has been an issue, and kids have had to move. We've had racism and the experience of having people bully children because of their race is so badly that they've had to switch schools completely. So this is kind of just the perspective that CASA has seen oppression exist. Claire, you have amazing thoughts, and I know it.
All I'm going to give is the
Pressure.
caveat of it is exactly 10:25 as we're recording this right now after a long, hard day. And so I think you said it amazingly, Hannah.
Okay,
Um,
wonderful.
actually, yeah, no notes. No notes. Superb.
Okay, so we're going to go into what are the barriers to interrupting. So you are going to kind of start thinking of what walls do you need to break down to be able to interrupt oppression, and to when you see these instances occurring in schools or in family meetings, etc., what can you do to stop it? Claire.
And thank you. I feel like a teacher's calling on me. Yes. So basically, I think also with this, we love this slide because there's a way that this little figure who's like busting through this wall is also really like this is an action. This is a step. This is like force. Like there is movement and motivation behind it. When we're talking about interrupting, it is something that is like unless it's your second hand and you're somebody who like calls stuff as you see it and you're very already about that like justice is like a guiding star for you, and you will go to like any means in order to like let people know that there is a way that this is not just like a passive experience, you know what I mean? So we're kind of putting our action coats on and being able to like step into that as like physical things that we can do, and not just this like sometimes vaguely put like doing the work or like just unpacking, though there's so much importance in like doing the readings and continuing to stay up to date on things. This is like how is it really going when you're in these situations and when especially you are in the CASA role and your voice is listened to in a different degree than maybe even the parents are. So that being
And
said.
I can give a few more examples too of what the class talked about where you're thinking like maybe you're still not sure what exactly you're interrupting. So for example, we had a mother that experienced pretty significant mental health issues for a very limited part of her case. It was actually a meth-induced psychosis that she had the police called due to the behavior she was having, and the caseworker asked her during kind of that time frame of her life to write a letter talking about her experience. So I think the intention was to go over it in therapy or something like that. Maybe she wrote it in therapy. And so this letter was then utilized and weaponized against her for the duration of her case. She stopped using substances. I believe that was her last incidence of substance use. And she went to treatment. She saw psychologists and mental health professionals that all said this was a specific instance. This was from from a meth-induced psychosis. And child welfare continued to use the letter she wrote to try to stop her from having her child returned to her, and was just not open to having any conversations about the progress mom had made. Well, CASA was able to write a very detailed report going over all of the things that mom had done with the supporting documents that child welfare had discovered, showing that mom had been making progress, highlighted, the fact that mom hasn't been getting visits as she should, and that mom has safety service providers that child welfare keeps denying for reasons that don't seem substantial, and provided evidence to that as well, and then gave all of this information to both the courts and sent a separate email just talking to the attorney and saying, just so you know, this is what we sent into discovery. This is the conversation we're going to be having in court. If you are wanting to support mom in this, we will be supporting her. And so the attorney was able to use CASA's report to then tell the courts mom should have her child back. And at that hearing, child was returned to mom 50-50 with dad. And dad had, half time and mom had the other half. And child welfare, shortly after that, decided that maybe they actually didn't have enough to be involved with the family and close their case. So that was an example of how the CASA had noted that mom was experiencing oppression based on her past substance use and based on her past mental health. So that we're thinking ableism. I'm sure there was probably some other things happening there too. We don't know where the intentions were coming from the caseworker. Maybe there was some misogyny. Maybe there was classism. There could have been other components, but for sure we see the ableism. And CASA used their power, their leverage to help tell the court the full story and to get the child where the child ultimately belonged, back with mom. And mom and child have been doing good for quite some time now. The dad is no longer 50-50 custody because he didn't continue to do well, but mom is. So that's just, one example. We've had other examples. Oh, Claire, you go. I don't want to keep
Yes. Okay.
talking.
No, no, no. I think this example is really amazing also because there was an additional layer of before that specific court hearing happened, mom was also had caregiving, was caregiving for another child, and child welfare like placed another child with her. So they were really just withholding her child and the one that she was having a specific case about with that. So she was seen as trusted enough for one kid, but not another. And the other thing that I really want to bring up with that example is I think something that happens a lot is like CASAs don't want to sometimes overstep or be, like attorneys are almost like running the show. They know the lingo, they're like moving it along in a particular way. And sometimes it can feel like a CASA is just there to say like they're one bit. And I had the honor of actually being there at that court hearing. And one of the things that really stood out to me is that CASA, when the letter was being brought up again as the reason why mom was not in a position to be the caretaker for this child was she stood up again and she said, I think this is unfair. And child welfare, did you forget that you were the ones who like had her write this? Like, I want that. Can we please state that out loud? And so she made an ask and I saw her and it was very uncomfortable. And she and I talked afterwards and she was like, oh my gosh, like I think I just pissed some people off. But it's like, by her doing that and by her emphasizing and going out on that extra limb and using the platform of being a CASA, it pushed it in a way where she was catching them in something that they were saying to try and build a narrative. And I'm not saying that she completely turned it around, but she rallied all of the other people who were there to support mom in a way that wouldn't have happened if she didn't go about it that way. And the child wouldn't have been returned that quickly and in that way. And mom feeling as supported as she did at the end if she didn't do that. So yeah, I think amazing example. And also, since this is not me saying that you can't say another example, but I think that's just such a fabulous example that if you want to pack it there, Hannah, feel free to, but go off.
So I do have two other ones that I'll do much quicker, but I think that they're important because they show different ways.
Mhm.
So this one
Yeah,
was specifically to do with a parent. The next one was a
right.
teen whose voice wasn't being heard. They were saying, I want guardianship. This is a 13-year-old saying, I want to go into a guardianship. I don't want to visit my mom anymore. I don't want to live with my mom. I don't want to live with my dad. I want to stay where I'm at. And child welfare is not listening. Nobody's moving things. If anything, they're doing the opposite of what this youth wants. And CASA was able to talk with child's attorney, will help get the child an attorney when one retired, and they found the best attorney, honestly, that they could have for this child. And they were able to help get the child's voice to the judge. And essentially, child welfare no longer had a stance that they weren't going to implement a guardianship. Of course, they're going to implement a guardianship. Of course, that's in the best interest for the child. But without CASA uplifting that child's voice and advocating for what the child wanted and what was in that child's best interest, that child would not be anywhere near guardianship. They would still probably be lingering in the system and possibly even bouncing homes, because that was one of their biggest things, was that they wanted a sense of permanency that child welfare wasn't giving them. And without that, it was causing further behaviors because they didn't feel that sense of belonging, that sense of stabilization. So that's a quick one about, CASA's voice to help advocate for what the child is in the child's best interest. But again, both of those were kind of in opposition to what child welfare was doing. And I think it's important to remember that it's not always the person, but a lot of times it's the systems that we're
Mhm.
battling against. So I
Yeah.
can think of another of a co-CASA team that helped kind of battle a system in the educational realm to help a child that was experiencing, oppression based on ableism to get into the school that was going to meet his best needs. And in this situation, teachers, caseworker, therapists, everybody was on board. Everybody wanted this, but it was the process, the rules, the laws, the whole kit and caboodle, if you will, or whatever that term is. I don't think I've ever used it in my life. Um, that was preventing this from happening quickly. So CASA was able to help escalate it and say, no, this child is losing their placement. They're having behaviors every day. They're dysregulated. They're afraid to go to sleep at night because they're kind of re-traumatized by going to the same school. And they're still dealing with all the trauma that they have. So we need to move them to somewhere they can be more stable. And because they were a continued presence, a continued force to keep the wheels moving, they were able to help that child stabilize quicker than they would have without them being there. So even though they weren't fighting a specific, like it wasn't in opposition to a specific person or organization, they helped the wheels in that system move quicker for the child to stop being limited in his school and stabilize.
Last thought on that is be the squeaky wheel.
Yes. Be the squeaky wheel. So now that we've had some of these thoughts and conversations, what are barriers to interrupting? What were the barriers that CASA in court was feeling? What do you think the barriers could have been for the educational situation? And what barriers would you have to helping that teen have their voice heard? Or any other examples that you've come up with on your own. So just think about what are the barriers to interrupting, and we'll give you that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to pause. Not that fast.
And go to your activity packet to write down some stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
To write down your barriers. Okay, so barriers that we came up with as a group were the setting. So maybe it's not the appropriate setting to call somebody out. Maybe the middle of court isn't the time to challenge the specific word that somebody used, or maybe it is. You don't know. I guess it depends on the situation. Maintaining relationships. So if you're worried about calling people out because it could damage that person's relationship, that would be another barrier. There's a power differential again that we talked about between maybe you feel like as a CASA, the attorneys have more power than you, or and you don't feel comfortable calling them out, which, we've talked about. We're all appointed to the family's case as legal parties. So we do have the power to be able to call people out in professional and respectful ways. The relationships being you don't want to be seen as the problem, the person that keeps bringing up issues, even though you're the one trying to solve these problems. We also talked about timing. Maybe you're a brand new CASA and you're just trying to learn how to speak up in your role, let alone speak up against something. Maybe it's the physical time part of timing. It was at the end of the court hearing, everybody rushed out the door. You didn't have time to address it. Maybe you're hearing about it after the fact and you're part of that cleanup crew. You're hearing this happen from somebody else's point of view, and now you have to go back and try to figure out how to clean up a mess, and you don't even know the whole story. I'm going to hand it over to Claire and take a drink of water because I'm talking way too much.
Please take a beat, hun. So starting on the right side. Wait, right? Yeah, you did the left. Okay, I just want to make sure. Sorry. Um, so the fear of not knowing as much or being wrong, that's kind of also going to like maybe the newness of the CASA relationship, or you were just able to meet mom because mom just like appeared, you know what I mean? Like let's say she wasn't able to be found before, a little MIA. So this is like you don't want to misstep in certain ways, or wanting to like play nice and get along with everybody and not wanting to be that squeaky wheel, not wanting to be that problem. A huge one that happens like so many times in life is the genuine shock from when people say things. Just being like, oh my gosh, that came out of left field. I have no idea why this was even brought up. And that'll especially happen in court. Everything's moving super duper fast. And then you're just like, whoa. Not understanding what's being said. So that's why, like, being able to learn about oppression and systems that are harmful to people is really, really important because if you don't know something, you can't even like identify if that's something that's harmful. You know what I mean? You yourself feeling unsafe. Like, let's say that it is a comment made about a community that you are a part of, and you're like, I am now feeling like I should not be here and I'm feeling threatened, or like physical safety is not a assurance. Um, ourselves slash terms. I think that was kind of going in the sense of like when we can kind of get in our own way and kind of going to like the not understanding what's being said, like not knowing the terms you would utilize, like for trying to interrupt, you know what I mean? Being like, that sounds wrong is going to hit a little bit different besides like that is a blatantly transphobic statement you just said, you know what I mean? There's a different weight in it, and that is why terminology can be so helpful and powerful in different situations. Also like the priority of needs, this one I think is like one of the main ones we see at CASA, where it's like, let's say you're talking about um like kid is now in resource placement and they are struggling with school. They are becoming incredibly dysregulated every single time that they see their parents at the visiting center. They are like having, sorry, I'm like thinking of way too specific examples here. Um, they are not being able to get on the bus. They are having fights with a bunch of people. There is a natural hierarchy that every party on the case will kind of put those in. You know what I mean? When our list making brains come out and we're like, this is the top priority, or these are the top three. And inevitably, when you're dealing with multi complications and difficulties that somebody is experiencing, you're going to hit this point where some things are going to be a little left to the wayside. And then it's like, oh my gosh, am I going to be the person who's bringing this up when we're talking about all these other things? Because let's say that they just got kicked out of the school that they were in because of all these different behaviors and starting too many fights. Is this the time to bring up that this child is like drinking alcohol already and like stealing and getting caught? You know what I mean? Like all of it's important. But that is a huge barrier, is especially when it becomes kind of like an incredibly long, exhaustive list, is the prioritization of that.
And I think that the important thing to remember is that the last screen. We're breaking down these barriers, right? So like in Claire's example, yes, this is the time to start bring it up because we need to remind people of the full picture. We
Yeah.
don't want them all focused on the child getting kicked out of school and everyone doesn't realize that he's about to get in a like accident for drinking and driving, you know? So being that squeaky wheel, and yes, there's going to be a priority of needs. You're going to have to choose your battles and consider your timing. But that doesn't mean you have to let things sit forever. That doesn't mean you can't eventually go back and redirect it. And some different ways of, overcoming these barriers, because next we're kind of going to go into a conversation about barriers themselves. But think just about ways that you've overcome other barriers that are similar. And we're going to give you some scripts that will be easy go-to things you can say that will help with when you're feeling surprised. You have something that you're naturally used to just pulling out and saying, or when you're not sure exactly if you know the right terms, but you know something that was said was wrong. What's a quick thing you can say to redirect the conversation and let them know that without having to know all the fancy terms? So we're going to give you some tools for your tool belt. But Claire, did you have anything to say before we go to the barriers thing?
It's kind of just about that last part about like the priority of needs. Is I think as we're talking about this like in its entirety, is it's really easy to get like lost in the sauce of like all of the policies and all of the different things and like decorum and ways of being and relationships and documents that you're reading and all of these things. But so many experiences that like kids and families are having are so interconnected. You know what I mean? Like there is a way that one thing, even though it may seem like less of a big deal, is almost inevitably tied to this larger issue because we're just getting the third person POV of these folks' lives. And so many things have reason. So it's also like everything has a reason. um, and I feel like that's a tangent, but I couldn't get it out of my brain.
Perfect. I love your tangents. They're always very helpful, though. Okay, let's find somewhere to put this. So we're pretending we're all together at this beautiful table. Reflective writing activity can be found in your activity back packet, and you're going to go through and consider a time that someone needed to be interrupted, and then think about why you chose not to or why you chose to. Go through all of these questions, take a little time to think about it. And then you're going to consider a time where you were called out or interrupted and explore some questions about how that felt for you. And if you would like to, there's a little link to our music that you can always play. When we were in class together, we like to play this really just whimsical music, and in the background, the video was fish swimming in coral reefs, and it was just peaceful. So if you want to do that, you can. If not, that's fine. We'll give you a second to pause, and then we'll see you back here in a moment, or you'll see us back here.
We will see you through the camera.
Okay, we're going to be going into our ways to interrupt.
Which leads us into so these are more terms. Look at your term sheet, have a great time with it. These are kind of like almost like I think of them as like a stepstone breakdown, because I know that the term, especially in 2020, when we were seeing a lot of the protests for Black Lives Matter and a lot of other things that were happening. The word allyship came up a lot, and allyship is amazing, but it is kind of like this first step in this process, essentially. And it is viewed as like the little to no risk one, where it's a thinking and learning phase, and where you're kind of like aligning yourself with a specific like cause or person. So, like, as an example from, let's just use like the 2020 protests that were happening, is a form of allyship would have been, I don't know if you all remember those like black boxes, that people would post on social media, or a specific blast, and I'm sorry, what I mean by blast is like, the saying like, oh, this thing is happening here, or there's this learning opportunity here. It's engaging, but with little physical risk and with minimal effort involved. Okay.
Sharing
So,
memes to remind people that this is a real
yeah.
issue with
Mhm.
levity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, kind of a lighter tone, um, and not a like deep engagement. You know what I mean? Like a very like surface level one in a lot of ways. So, going deeper in that is this concept of being an accomplice. So, showing up for historically excluded groups where there is some risk. So, let's say that you are in the like, through an ally of an organization, find out about a protest that's happening, and you decide to go, but you're standing all the way in the back. You know what I mean? Like, you're marching and you're protesting, but you're standing in the back, and you kind of leave a little bit early. Like, you're showing up, you're there, you're doing the due diligence, there's some risk, but there is also like safety measures in that. And especially within this example, let's say that you are a white person also doing this, there's a way that that also has a certain level of safety within um, well policed scenarios, for lack of a better term. So, kind of going with that same example, we there is also this farther step of being a conspirator. So that's showing up with historically excluded groups where there is high risk, where you are putting yourself on the front line. And I want to be clear that it's not like the glorification of, I think activism gets like a bad rap nowadays, where it's just seen as like this ego boost. It's a very dangerous endeavor to take on being a public activist. There are so many things that can happen to you and your loved ones as a result of that, let alone the community that you are standing along and like fighting for. So, in the example of like 2020 protests, is, let's say that you are a part of a Black Lives Matter chapter in your city, and you are one of the organizers and coordinators, and you are sending out information, materials, like education, all of these different things. And you are at the front of the protest, and you are a part of the blockade against the police to make sure that like children and elders are not being like physically harmed within this, or the people who are disproportionately, what's the word? Like, there's like a connecting word I'm looking for, like disproportionately, um, oh my God, Hannah,
I know
like,
I'm trying to get there too, like targeted or like hurt.
yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. I kept wanting to say like with, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's not, anyway,
Yes.
disproportionately targeted. Um, And so you are putting yourself in that front line, high risk. You can lose things as a result of this. Okay. So this is kind of the framework. All of them have their place, all of them have their time. All of this is also a part of the learning process. Like, usually you like become an ally, and then you become an accomplice, and then like you go deeper and you become a co-conspirator. Also, it takes time to do that, and relationships and networking. It's not just, I read this really cool article and now like I am fighting alongside people. There's usually like a very natural navigate like pathway into that. So what we're going to do is we're going to show three different examples, and the specific examples that we're going to be talking about is, so right now at this point in time, I don't think we've said this. The year that we're filming this in is 2024. And it has been almost an entire year that Palestinian people have been experiencing a genocide Prior, it was an apartheid state, which also did have a lot of violence in it. And it is not that this is new, it is just a unprecedented situation that has ramped up in violence against them and has also caught global attention in a completely different way. So we're going to see three different examples, one of allyship, accompliceship, and co-conspiratorship. And we're also going to see them across like different platforms. This first example is a singer and artist named Renee Rapp, and she is at a award ceremony, GLAAD Media Awards, and she's accepting an award on behalf of her music, but she takes time to shout this part out. You can watch the entire clip. She's making a lot of jokes and just being like a fun human being for the first minute or so, but we wanted to really highlight that this next part was like important enough to be in this speech when she's on a public platform like this. So, Hannah, take us away.
I pushed the play.
We're in a room of very influential people and very privileged people, which is exciting and also is a huge privilege to be a part of that. Having said that, I'd like to take the opportunity to show support and call for an immediate ceasefire and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Please continue to advocate for yourselves, continue to advocate for your friends, for your queer friends, and for those who can't advocate for themselves. Thanks.
So that's an example of, she was putting herself out there. It was tacked on to this other thing that she was doing, accepting a speech, but using what was like within her means to like say something. This next example we're going to have here is Kamala Harris, who is addressing protesters at one of her rallies on her presidential campaign that she's currently going through. And she's wanting, does it give the context, Hannah? I kind of forget.
I can give the context real quick.
Yeah.
So she is giving a speech at her rally, and there's going to be two clips. So this is at one of the earlier rallies where the Palestine protesters are in the back and they're kind of drowning out her voice. And this is the first way she chooses to interrupt. And then you'll see, and I'm using interrupt in like not the way we're talking about. This is the first way she chooses to stop the protest. And then we're going to see the growth, but we'll just watch the first way first. Oops, hold on.
And then do you want to take it back, Hannah, really quick?
Yes. As soon as I get it to work. Can you hear it?
No.
He intends to cut Social Security and Medicare. He intends to surrender our fight against the climate.
Dang it. It keeps doing it. Doesn't help that the cat's climbing on my lap, everybody.
Oh, it's still on it.
Correct. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that. Otherwise, I'm speaking.
Okay, so notice how they're getting louder and louder, even though it's kind of hard because of all my pausing. So they're getting louder and louder in the background. And then she says, you know what? If you want Trump to win, keep speaking because you're interrupting me. So clearly she's saying what I have to say in this moment is more important than what the protesters have to say. And I want to be clear that we're not using this example as political affiliations, though, I mean, it's pretty clear. Anyway, going on. We are using it as an example because it demonstrates really good growth where she is interrupting. She is stopping what's happening. These people are trying to say, we need to fight for Palestine. We need to call for a ceasefire. And she's just like, no, I don't want anything to do with this. So then in the next quick clip, this is after she now understands that the people that were interrupting the speech were doing that to talk about Palestine. They were trying to draw attention to Palestine. She is now more aware of the situation. She's talked to people that are pro-Palestine and understands what they're asking. So she's taken the time to learn. And this is the example of the growth that she's made from that. And now we're looking at her more in the accomplice. No, what's the word I'm looking for? Ally.
This is,
yeah.
Yes. The accomplice role.
Yes.
Number of folks who are here together because we love our country. We're here to fight for our democracy. Which includes respecting the voices that I think that we are hearing from. And let me just say this on topic of what I think I'm hearing over there. Let me just speak to that for a moment, and then I'm going to get back to the business at hand. So let me say, I have been clear. Now is the time to get a ceasefire deal and get the hostage deal done. Now is the time. And the president and I are working around the clock every day to get that ceasefire deal done and bring the hostages home. So I respect your voices, but we are here to now talk about this race in 2024.
Okay, so now in that one, you can see how she gave attention to the pro-Palestinian people that were in the background, and she acknowledged their voice, she drew value to it, and then she used her platform. So going back to our little thing here, she used her platform to be an accomplice and show up for those historically excluded groups, which in this case was the Palestinian people. So now we're going to go into a co-conspirator where we're looking at showing up with the group. And remember, this is more high risk.
And for this specific example, oh, did you want to go, Hannah?
No, you go.
Okay. So for this specific example, at this time period when this was filmed, there were so many different universities and schools where students and professors and different staff members were protesting on their campuses. And as you can see kind of in this image on the left here, there is a heavy, that is not just police, that is like a militarized presence that is there, that they are contending with. And you can see
peaceful protests too, not that. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Where you're just seeing that, if anything, there's not even a barricade or anything. There's a sign on the ground and people standing, and it's not even a substantial amount of people, and they're being met with this. So this is an example of, and let me actually pull up this professor's name really quick. I want to be really clear about it and give her the spotlight that she deserves. Her name is Dr. Tiffany Woolby Hurdy, yes, arrested at University California Irvine. There we go. And this is a clip of her being arrested at the protest. And what she has to say is very powerful. And this is an example of co-conspirator because she has a doctorate and she's getting arrested. And there are real ramifications that are going to happen from this in her life, whether that is her employment or having now a record, having to pay bail, going through the experience of being arrested is incredibly traumatizing and triggering. But anyway, very important. Hannah.
And I should probably add that we are by no means asking any CASAs to go out and be at this level of fighting oppression. Please do not go out.
Your professor and undoing a democratic, peaceful protest. Shame on them. Shame on them.
And what department are you in?
I'm in the Global Studies Department.
And why are you here today?
Because we cannot have a genocidal foreign policy in a democracy. These young people are going to be the ones that have to pay the price for these horrible decisions. These police officers out here today, that's thousands of student scholarships. Thousands of students could have been able to go to school and have books and have housing. But instead, our chancellor, who is a very cruel man, decided to send thousands of dollars worth of state funding paid for by the taxpayers into the trash.
Are you concerned about this jeopardizing your job?
For real. What job do I have if the students don't have a future?
Hello, I'm Mark Brown. Get more.
So I think it's important to note too, when I was saying before, I'm not saying that she's interacting in any way that she deserves to be arrested, because she absolutely did not deserve that. She was on her employment property doing a peaceful protest, and she is trying to send a very clear message that's what's happening in Palestine is not okay. And I think that example has stuck out to me so many times. Every time we watch it, it's so powerful when you hear her say, what future? What is my job if there's no future?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. You want to go to the... Okay. Well, taking a moment to breathe in and out for people's courageous attempts and engagement with change and progress, and the absolute difficulty and uphill battle that can be, but an important one to be a part of. So I just want to take a moment to recognize that. Where are we at? Okay, so we've gone through quite a few things in this training so far, but now we are at the crux of having the what's the word? The decisiveness to identify if you are wanting and needing to call something in or calling it out. So the difference between the two is calling in is when you talk to someone privately about a harmful comment or action that they have made. It is a conversation, you know what I mean? It is a back and forth and a dialogue. Calling out is when you announce in a more public manner or more direct immediately about what someone said or did as something that's harmful. So as you can kind of see in these bullet points is like when to use them. You can utilize, and this is a non-exhaustive list. Calling in can happen when you are in relationship with a person, when you believe that they are open to learning, when you are wanting to give them the benefit of the doubt, like, did I hear that correctly? And can have a lot more compassion and empathy, especially if it's like a first try. You know what I mean? First time you're hearing someone say something like this. Calling out can be really utilized when calling in is not an option, or maybe it hasn't been working. It is a repetitive issue. When when words or actions are causing harm and feelings of unsafety and deep any form of uncomfortability, but especially when it's like, this is not okay, people are not doing well with this being in the space. And especially when it's done publicly, because then with that situation, as an example, is like, let's say something incredibly problematic is stated and everybody is silent, and then it just moves on. It makes it seem like everybody in the room is okay with that. And then that's making the folks that it was targeted towards feel incredibly alone and isolated, and then not wanting to trust people, which is then not leading into the sense of belonging that we're talking about that comes from when you have, these components of like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just to have a full circle moment there. That being said, Hannah, any thoughts?
No, I think you did a beautiful job explaining the differences. So now we're going to go into the importance of receiving and responding to interruptions. So this is when you specifically are being interrupted. So like you've caused the harm. So you can acknowledge the impact of my actions, even if my intentions aren't to harm. Do you want a popcorn?
Sure.
Okay.
Acknowledge that perfection and the good/evil binary do not exist within me or others.
Except I will mess up, creating opportunities for people to interrupt the harm I've done.
Get used to the discomfort of being held accountable.
Refrain from defensiveness.
Listen, especially to those being oppressed.
Use mindfulness practices to stay present, calm, and better able to listen.
Use self-compassion and understanding of the big picture to motivate myself into action rather than getting stuck in guilt.
Apologize and make amends.
Take actions to change my behavior.
Recognize it can be difficult to interrupt when people have less power. We might worry about safety and being heard.
Do my own research.
Have a self-care plan.
Support myself and others.
And remember, most think of themselves as kind, and all of us have the capacity to change. So these are just some ways to interact when you are you are the one being called out or interrupted. And we've taken a lot of these resources from online, so please do check that reference list so you can see.
The other thing, do you mind if I say a little bit, Hannah, on
Yeah,
that?
absolutely, Claire.
Is I think that also like this is a really good list to be able to also like understand like the like 360 view, you know what I mean, on we're seeing people as people here, you know what I mean, like coming from the foundation of in America we are primarily taught like an incorrect and oppressor version of history, is that there are things that we like it's inevitably going to be discomforting to peel back the layers and to face our own privileges and ways that we have messed up and done harm, and you know the shame that goes with that. Shame isn't very useful, but being able to like recognize and learn, and I think a lot of these are really great points to also like tapping in with just like the humanity of yourself. And if you're wanting and if you are actively engaged in that learning and growth space, how it can like, I want to say elevate, but like transition you to the like not doing things anymore. You know what I mean? And like we as humans learn things by our mistakes. You know what I mean? Like we learn a lot more lessons by messing up than we do by getting things right on the first try. And so this is a very like messy endeavor, especially when you are unpacking your own oppressive ideology and the things that you have been taught and told, and all of these inherent um, systems that like you might be perpetuating. And I just want to give the whole caveat of like, this is very difficult and it is very important. And this also just makes you a safer and understanding person to be able to bring things to. And I remember when we did one of these trainings before, Hannah and I talked about how even in the creation of like this training, you know, like it took us like 2 years to be able to make this into a virtual one, is like we have had so many conversations with each other and having the comfortability with navigating all of these different bullet points to be able to really contend with like making and facilitating like this body of work as it is now. And how there were so many different points we were incredibly uncomfortable, and but like it being worth something, you know what I mean, like if we're gonna make a mistake, if we're going to, and that's not to say that it is okay to do that, but if being a human we are going to fumble, picking yourself up and like moving to the next thing and repairing and like being there is like showing up is huge. Showing up is just major. So anyway,
Yeah.
if you
And
want to go to
sometimes it's helpful to practice with people you're comfortable with. Like Claire and I learned a lot from just having conversations with each other because we were able to feel safe together. So if you have somebody you feel safe with that you can practice and you guys can hold each other accountable, that's a great place to start.
absolutely.
Okay, if
And
you
this might
hear a
look
noise, that is the puppy trying to break into the room because she is very convinced that it's bedtime.
probably is for her. So this font is very small, but we actually have it on the activity sheet. Hannah, did you want to go to that? Because is
Yeah,
that,
people that really
yeah, that's the part that we're at.
quickly.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't like jumping ahead.
Yeah.
So directing to the activity sheet. So it's a little bit more readable. Hannah typed all of this up on her own
I was
just for
actually able
the,
to get the original from the creator and reference it and turn it into this PDF. Like combine it with our PDF. So fancy stuff.
truly. Okay,
Yeah.
did you want to do this part, Hannah?
Yeah, so we are going to give you some scenarios that you can practice with. As my psychology teacher always used to say, if you don't have somebody to practice with your cat or practice with your wall. The important thing is that you're saying it out loud and you're making those neuro pathways in your brain, making the connections. So, hopefully you can find somebody to practice with, but if not, just read the scenario maybe in somebody else's voice in your mind and then practice saying one of these. So you can use this to practice calling in or calling out based on the scenario that we give you. The call out is on the first page and the call in is on the second page. It'll again give you reminders of when to use these. So, when you're trying to explore the deeper conversation, make meaning, etc. It'll give you the reasons to use this. And then you're going to go to, so let's go here and make sure we're not missing anything for you all. Okay, so we are on the right spot. We're going to do a little practice for you with the scenarios. The scenarios are underneath the practice examples. That's not the right page. So shall we start?
Yes. So we're gonna practice for you all for a couple of these. And then we're gonna turn it over to you once we're done, and we'll chat about that in a sec. So to be clear, none of this is Hannah and I's opinions. We are just stating this as it is written here. Okay.
And we wrote these to try to reflect what you might actually hear in the CASA role.
Very, very common things. She is using substances. It's her own fault if she ODs.
That seems like very black and white thinking, and we don't talk about people that experience substance use like that in our organization, so you should probably go do some more research.
So, as an example of calling out very quickly, shutting it down, but also Hannah added the lovely sprinkle and addition of look things up too, because there are things.
And I'm not giving them the information. I'm not helping them look things up. I am telling Claire, you go do that. I'm shutting this down. This is your job. I'm not looking for a time to connect or to build our relationship. This is just, I don't agree with you. You go do you. Do better.
Truly.
Okay. She's very smart for being autistic.
I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that folks who are on the autism spectrum cannot be smart. That is not right. I'm not okay with that.
So again, Claire just very quickly called me out, said that my way of thinking was probably not the correct one, and that influences me to then go and, hopefully want to know why.
And also being able to make like I statements, like let's say you're struggling with the fact of like, oh my gosh, I actually don't know that much about like the autism community and the spectrum of it. Like you could just be like, I don't like this. I don't want you to be talking about this around me. Okay,
So
so
now we're practicing calling in.
so this is the more chitty chat version, a dialogue back and forth.
I care about
Just
Claire and I want to build our relationship.
right. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of like say this piecemeal so that like the direct quotation is the last thing that Hannah hears. So this is the context that the father has been volatile in the past. And when talking about a child that is having behavioral issues, a party says he's just like his father.
That's an interesting point of view, Claire. Can you tell me more about why you think that?
They just have the same outbursts and like violent tendencies, and it's unmanageable.
What do you know about their trauma history and about the family? Do you know if they're using any resources to try to help manage their anger?
I mean, I think that the dad was maybe referred to the dad's program, but I just I don't know. I mean, we all read the documents that we were given, like the initial case packet, but I just think that like this child is learning a really bad example from his father.
And why do you think that the example is all coming from his father? And do you think that there is room to explore the situation more?
I mean, I guess like when I consider it, it's not like his mom also doesn't have certain like behavioral issues as well. I think that the dad is the most volatile one that we've seen. Um, I don't know. I just feel like his behavior is always this way after he's seeing his dad.
It just seems like when I hear you say he's just like his father, it just seems like a very um, set mindset versus a growth mindset. So we at CASA always want to believe that people have the capacity to change and to do better. So maybe if you're saying he's just like his father in a negative way, you should reconsider the things that him and his father can still do to grow and to change and what services that they may or may not need to engage in to get that way. But we don't want to compare him to his father in a negative way because maybe they did have a lot of the same behaviors and they did learn a lot. Maybe he did learn a lot from his father, but that doesn't mean that they both don't have the capacity to do better. And we don't want to pair them in like a negative connotation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I think that like I'm definitely drawing a correlation between them. And as I'm like hearing myself say this out loud, I sound just like my bitterness for this dad is like really leading this. Um, yeah, I mean, like they're not the same people at the end of the day. And there are services and different things like classes or like therapy or, of different varieties that like they could engage in. Yeah.
I'll give you some resources and some information so that you can do some more learning and growing on this topic. And then if you have any questions, you can feel free to come back and talk to me later after you've done some more processing on your own.
Thank you. Yeah, I was pretty elevated at the beginning of this, so that would be nice.
Uh, okay.
And seen.
And see, we are professional actresses and actors, and I don't know
What can we say?
what the word
Actor,
I
I
would
think
look
is
for there.
what was that?
I said, I don't know what word I'm looking for here, but
Just
we're
actor.
something.
Yeah, so real. But yeah, and
We're
I think
something,
so that
Claire. I'm like,
kind of
I'm starting to think as I say that, I'm like, we are tired. We are in need of water.
drink some water and I'll unpack this. Chug a lug, okay? Um, so I think this was an example of like maybe this is a situation where like Hannah and I know each other a little bit. And I was like previously elevated because of something else. Maybe I just like have a really huge bias against the dad because of a different situation. And Hannah being able to pinpoint like specific things that she could identify as like this could make the situation better also. Like you are not looking at this clearly and being able to break down logic in call ins is really, really huge. Not as a way to be like, let me break your understanding of the world, but in the sense of if you're seeing that someone is coming at things with a really rigid idea and a very set one, that being able to like almost walk through it with them and then being able to point out the different things that you can tell they're not considering is really, really huge.
Open-ended
People
questions.
Yeah, open-ended questions, making somebody else think instead of just regurgitate those automatic statements that are coming out, whether they're like heated or it's just like the thing that they believe, can really, really do that.
Okay.
God, I love this slide. It's so cute. Anyway.
This slide too, speaking of slides we love. So you're going to go to your last box in that whiteboard activity that we had. So back on page 2, and you're going to talk about how you can show up. So what are some of your main takeaways from this training? After you go through and practice the rest of these questions, let's go back. You practice, then come back and I'll say what I'm about to say in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Practice, pause, come back. Okay, so now you're back from practicing. We're going to process, the time you took practicing, the ins, calling in and calling out that you learned. Go to that last page or that second page, last box of your whiteboard activity, and talk about how you can show up and what are your main takeaways. So what are you going to walk away from this training trying to utilize and in your CASA role? Ooh, I didn't know we had it
That
doing.
dot just pop up?
Yeah,
So
isn't that interesting?
No, it is. I never noticed that one.
I didn't know we did that. So some ways that CASAs can show up with allyship, accomplice, or co-conspirator, leveraging the CASA role in reports, such as the example we gave earlier. Just really listening to the people that you're working with, the families, the kids, actively listening, trying to empathize, put yourself in their shoes, and really be compassionate and understanding. Use your voice to advocate, call people in and call people out when you can, and just add anything else you can think of to that list. And we do have a getting to know your survey, getting to know your CASA child survey that comes out every once in a while. But in case you're watching this in a year where they're no longer doing that survey, just make sure to keep your case supervisor up to date on what's happening with your family and letting them know when you get a new family, things that case supervisors don't always get information on. Like if your child is experiencing a disability, if they're part of a marginalized community, and then get to know your family. So just really get to know who they are. This can help you and the reason I should go back, the reason you want to make sure your caseworker knows all of that or case supervisor knows all that is because there's things that case supervisors are doing in the office to help get funding for marginalized communities. And the more they can report on who we're serving and who we're advocating for, the more they're able to get support from the community and from grantors and other people to help our children. So just make sure you're keeping them up to date. And then another thing you can do is just make sure you're understanding your kids. So talk to the family. What are their cultures and traditions that they had prior to being in care? Do they celebrate specific holidays? Are they from a specific faith or spiritual background? Do they have cultural practices? Do they go to community events? Have they been in Boy Scouts for every generation of their family? What about their extended family? What are the kids' interests now? Are they changing their names, or the ways that they present? Are they exploring spirituality or different languages? Are they trying to create their own new traditions? And what does their current placement do? Are they making sure the kids are engaged in the things above that you've talked about, or in the things the kids are now interested in? Is there anything that they're wanting to explore and experience that you can be a support to, that you can help get them access to, that maybe they're not able to financially, or they don't have anyone in their corner to help advocate for them to have that experience? And make sure to provide your case supervisor with the information. I got a little ahead of myself there, but we already talked about why. Claire, anything to add? I think this might be our last actual slide.
This is, and my point, the point I want to bring up with this one is that like all of this is in an effort to make sure that the transition, especially if like your CASA kid was removed from their family and home of origin into one that they don't know, or even one that they maybe knew, or whatever that is, I know that like within CASA, we say like every move is its own site of trauma. And it's really important to remember that like there can be things that provide comfort to us as people and these kids, that if it's like followed through and it's consistent, it's able to bring a sense of comfortability and normalcy to a wildly unnormal experience. And like, I don't say maybe not unnormal, maybe like one that is incredibly complicated and very, very difficult to bear the burden of. And
Absolutely.
especially the younger kids are, the less they're usually going to be able to really understand what's happening. So having things like them being able to see their great great grandma who they would see, maybe once a year or something, like having that, whatever that consistency was for them, whatever those things that they would engage in, is just going to be able to make any transition smoother. Um, and then, like Hannah was saying, like being able to like know your kid as like this person and not just this is a child who experienced trauma and neglect, but like really meeting them where they're at and being engaged and all of those things. And then also like with their family, for whoever that encompasses, with the people who are taking care of them. Sometimes unfortunately there will be a clash between like the resource placement and the child, and being able to be aware of that and sensitive to that, or if it's like really going great, you know what I mean, like being really tapped in is only just going to be able to bring a certain level, like an oomph to your advocacy in this all. um and again, like consult with your case supervisor on any and all of the above. Is, let's say that like the family that you're working with's predominant language is Spanish, and you're like, I am not a Spanish speaker. How to navigate that? And that's just as an example, which we've definitely had CASAs who that was their experience, and they went ahead and decided that they were going to learn Spanish. And they did that, and that is not required, but it's a different way to connect. Um, Anything else? I feel very hesitant to like wrap up this slide because it is our last one.
Well, I don't know, because I'm excited for one is this beautiful
Yeah.
picture. And then just to
Mhm.
say, like, thank you all for being here with us on this ride. Ooh, we don't want to make it that screen. We want the pretty screen back. Well, this is where we're at in life. Thank you for being here with us and for going on this journey. It's been a wonderful time, and we're just like proud of you for making it through all the DEI sessions. We're proud of ourselves. We did it. And there's so many things I want to say. Claire, what do you want to say?
Okay, a couple of thoughts off the noggin. First, I this picture is really great because we're leaving you at one end of this bridge. And whether you decide to cross the bridge or like stay there and admire the scenery and like wow, like take everything in, complete moments for both of those. We really, really, really encourage you all to cross that bridge. We bring up diving down the rabbit hole a million and one times in this training for a very specific reason. And it's not just because we like the narrative of Alice in Wonderland, is because
So we really
it's really
do.
right. It's really important, and like exploring and being interested in the world and viewing it as something that you are interacting with and you can show up in is just like we have a human experience. And without getting too meta in it, it's like lean into the ways that this is like hopeful. And there are so many things happening in the world, and there's so much positive change that is occurring. And that is the reason why CASAs were like created in the first place, was to be able to be a positive force in this system, in this particular field, that not that there wasn't any in, but it was just lacking. And so y'all are able to bring that in a totally different way. Um, Also, thank you for taking time out of your day. Like, time is incredibly precious, and Hannah and I are incredibly honored that we were able to put on and finally finish the virtual version. And across time and space, whenever you all are watching, listening to this, um, thank you for being here. Thank you for being you and being engaged in this volunteership that is incredibly impactful and important. And
Yeah.
be a sponge.
Yeah. And also, we just hope this was as engaging as possible. We hope,
Yeah.
we tried, even though we're not with you in the same time and space that you are in this training, we tried to make it as engaging as we can. So please do fill out the survey and give us feedback in case we ever decide to revamp this or make edits or anything. We would really value your feedback, and there's a link to that in the emails that we send. Sebastian, my kitty, making an appearance for the last moment here. He decided he couldn't wait any longer.
Oh my goodness. What a baby.
Yeah, I love your bridge analogy. I hope you all cross it and go on an adventure of DEI. And for all the people out there listening that also have already, done a lot of work on this, thank you for taking our training and being here anyway, regardless of all of the work and effort you've already put in, even if your strides across like many, many other bridges than Claire and I have crossed.
Yes.
We know there's some real hardworking professionals out there doing the things.
Doing the do.
Doing the do. That's what I was gonna say, but then I was like, is that a saying or am I just making that up because, we've been on here for 2 hours?
And we share a brain cell, Hannah.
Okay.
That being said,
Thank you
I think that
all.
this is our natural conclusion. Have a
Bye.
lovely rest of your day. Have a great time. See
Or
y'all later.
night or wherever you
Bye.
are in space and time. Goodbye.